One of our proud partners is SOAS University, and we're so pleased we can partner with them to bring you today's event. The exhibition, Embodied Liberation, will lead the audience through different chronological periods of yoga's history using a variety of visual and interactive mediums, which derive from the diverse methodological approaches used by the research team. Handwritten Sanskrit manuscripts, which are fascinating samples of the principal textual discoveries of the project, will be on display. A vivid Mughal painting of pre-modern asceticism will be contrasted with photographs and video material sourced during extensive ethnographic fieldwork of present-day ascetic practitioners in India, including very rare examples of female practitioners. So there's some lovely content for you to see later on. The event is being presented by our two curators of the exhibition, Daniela and Jacqueline. And before I pass it over to them, I'd like to just say a few words about them. So Daniela is a South Asianist who uses ethnographic and historical methodologies to dig into religious issues of Indian culture. She received her PhD in Civilizations of Africa and Asia from the Sapienza University of Rome. She's now a postdoc research fellow at SOAS, working for the ERH-funded Hatha Yoga project. Her role in the project is to collect, through fieldwork, historical evidence of yoga practice and ethnographic data among living ascetic practitioners of yoga. Jacqueline is an engineer and yoga teacher who researches how historical yoga practices are applied in the modern world. She's the curator of this exhibition at Brunei Gallery. She's also the founding member of the Journal of Yoga Studies, a peer-reviewed academic journal. And she's also the founder of the Luminescent, an independent open access educational platform for the scholarly study of yoga. After the tour, which will last roughly 30 minutes, there will be a Q&A, so do keep your questions ready. I'm going to put myself on mute and I'm going to pass it over to, who's speaking first, Jacqueline or Danielle? I'm going to pass it over to Danielle.
Okay.
So everyone enjoys it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Bhav, and thanks to everyone for being here, connected with us. So what we are going to do today is to give you a taste of the Embodied Liberation exhibition. And this exhibition aims actually to communicate the research methods and finding of the Hatha Yoga project. Jackie, can you change the slide? So the Hatha Yoga project is a 5-year research project founded by the European Research Council and based at SOAS, as Bhavit was saying. And the members of this project are James Melanson, who is the principal investigator, Mark Singleton, Jason Birch, and myself. And the aim of the Hatha Yoga project is to chart the history of physical yoga practices by means of philology, that means manuscript, as well as the study of contemporary practitioners through ethnography. And so to accomplish this kind of mission, we tried to, in the past 4 years, to collect as much data as we could, looking at, as we said, a manuscript, individuals, but also historical evidence. And for this reason, at the entrance of the exhibition, you could have seen a huge map of India where the public could realize and follow a bit our movements of the past years, and also the reason why we went in specific places. In fact, as you can see, there are 3 different icons: archaeological, ethnographic, and textual, that more or less gives the idea why we went in some places and what we did there. And looking at this map, you can also imagine how much material we accumulated in this 4 years, and a lot of this was visual. So James Melanson asked me, like, why don't we make an exhibition? And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? But then I realized that something is to collect data from fieldworks, and something else is to create an exhibition. But I was very lucky because Jacqueline accepted to help me in this huge task. And I have to say, she was the supporting column of the organization, of the planning of the exhibition. And I think she should say something more about the organization and everything. Jackie, please.
Thank you for such a kind introduction, Daniela and Vav. So the exhibition itself was held in the Brunei Gallery, in fact, the foyer room of the Brunei Gallery. It started in mid-January, so about the 16th of January, ran through to the 21st of March. And as I mentioned to Vav a little earlier before we started the talk, we had hoped to continue right through to June. In fact, it was so popular that the gallery owners had asked us, or the gallery head had asked us to extend the exhibition through to the next season, which was to June, but COVID unfortunately got in the way. And so it's all sitting there nicely hung on the walls, but nobody can go in and see it. And so we wanted to welcome people and to orientate newcomers to this idea of the diverse history and wisdom tradition of Hatha Yoga, which spans 1,000 years from about 1000 CE through to the present. And visitors were initially greeted with video installations. So here you see a contemporary practitioner juxtaposed against another video installation in the background of a yogi mural painted on a wall in a temple in Jodhpur. And so we wanted to invite people to look at something familiar, but also contrast it against what might yoga have been in the past. And we hope to invite the visitor to be immersed in the diverse range of material that's available on the history of yoga. So that might include video, photographic imagery, manuscripts themselves, precious items that we borrowed from collections. We were challenged, I guess, by the space in that it was quite small, and we're trying to fit 1,000 years of history. And as Daniela said, quite a significant amount of research that's been done, not only over the 5 years of the Hatha Yoga project, but some of the work that predated the project itself. So although there was no prescriptive route for a visitor to walk through the exhibition, we did try to encourage a sense of time and space by using the media itself. So in this case, we used objects like stone to depict the earlier, the earliest record we have of yoga, right through to manuscripts, in the case where we have visual paintings in the form of manuscripts, as well as wall paintings. And then as we moved more towards the contemporary period, we changed media and we went to things like photography and also film reconstruction. So as one entered the exhibition, the first painting or image that one was encountered was that of the yogic body, or this man seated in deep meditation. And for us, we really wanted to communicate a sense of the title of the exhibition, which was Embodied Liberation. So one of seated in stillness, perhaps a master of the techniques of Hatha Yoga. And then what does embodied liberation actually mean? So Jivan Mukti, this liberated while living. And we thought that this visual representation describes a lot. So if we have a closer look, we might notice that in this beautifully detailed image, we were able to pick up on some of the techniques. So he's not just sitting there still with tattoos on his body. In fact, what we find is these chakras are describing an inner world, what's being visualized by the yogi. And in this case, his eyes half open, half closed. So his gaze is outward, but his awareness is very much inward. He's able to maintain a clear sense of what's going on inside his body. He's a master not only of these the subtle body, but also able to move vitality. So in this case, we might see, if we look quite closely, a very small snake climbing up this central channel. And we think it might be symbolic of the raising of Kundalini, so this primordial feminine energy that rises up when one is successful in the practice of Hatha Yoga. So shown by Mahamudra, though, that this gaze that we see here is quite a unique mechanism through Hatha Yoga that results, if the yogi is absorbed in meditation, results in the highest state of Raja Yoga. So we complemented this particular image with one of the earliest definitions we find of a system, well, in fact, it is the earliest definition we find of a system of Hatha Yoga, which was identified by the Hatha Yoga Project. In fact, Dr. Jason Birch, who is editing and translating the edition of the Amaralga, which he's now dated to the 12th century, and we find this definition: Hatha Yoga is that yoga we accomplish by breath and internal resonance. So it's not that one accomplishes something with the breath, it's rather that the breath is stopped. This internal resonance, the nada. The nada is that which he is absorbed on, the internal resonance within. As one turned the corner, we're greeted by another fellow seated in a meditative posture, but this time he's seated on a fish bound in a yoga pata. And so the fish enables us to identify him as Matsyendranath. He's an enlightened Shiva Siddha, if you like, an accomplished one within this particular lineage, Shaiva lineage. And he's said to be the guru of the founder of Hatha Yoga. So from here, I'd like to hand back to Daniela, and she's going to talk us through some of the works in stone.
Yeah, in fact, this section in the exhibition is called Yoga Carved in Stone, and we wanted to collect in this specific section some of the earliest visual representation of ascetics performing posture to show the importance of this kind of evidence to reconstruct the yoga history. And so we address our attention especially towards temples, because these monumental buildings. Jackie, can you put the next slide? Jackie, the next slide. Yes, perfect. Yes, because so that you can have an idea about what I'm going to talk.
Yeah, it's a bit slow. Sorry.
It's okay, doesn't matter. So we focus our attention on temples because these buildings really provide some of the most important sculptures, which we consider as a kind of representation of individuals of the time the artist made it. And namely, we focus our attention on 4 places during the exhibition. We focus our attention on the Vijayanagara temple complex in Hampi from the 16th century. Then we looked at the Shankara Temple in Sringeri from the 16th century, and Jackie is going to say something more about it in a little while. And also to the Mallikarjuna Temple in Srisailam, which is from the 15th century. However, our main finding actually was the Dabhoi Gate. The Dabhoi is a small city in Gujarat, and it has 4 main gates in the 4 directions. And with James Mallinson, we went to look at the Mahudi Gate, that is the northern gate, because some scholars went there and they found that the lower parts of the gate presented the representation sculptures of the Natsiddhas. So as already mentioned by Jackie, Matsyendranath and Gorakshnath, and then on top of them there are representation of the yoginis and other sculptures. But when Jim and I went there, actually we realized that for us the main treasure was on top, on the upper part. As you can see in the arches, there are a lot of small sculptures, and we realized that in between, especially from the inner part of the gates, some of these sculptures were actually ascetics performing complex asanas. And we knew that they were ascetics because often they were close to other individual performing more meditational practices. Next slide, Jackie. I'm gonna to wait a little bit so you can enjoy this image. And so you can see here the context, an ascetic performing a complex asana, and the other one sitting in meditation. And these are very important. This is a very important finding for us, because this gate is probably from the 13th century, and this means that these are the earliest evidence that we have of inverted postures and some of complex postures. And what is interesting is that we do not find these postures described in text. So again, this shows us the importance of looking at different evidence, different sources, putting together different perspectives to be able to reconstruct in a wider way the history of yoga. However, one has to be also careful about the context in which these images are presented. And I would like Jackie to add something more about the context of the sculptures.
So thank you, Daniela. So our choice and placement of these images was in relation to some larger images we had printed of the temples themselves. So we wanted to give the visitor to the gallery an experience of what it's like to encounter these images. Can you hear me? My internet's gone a little unstable, but there it is, it's back. Okay, so first of all, one was greeted with a full picture of the entire temple. And in this case, it's the Shankara Temple in Sringeri. It has, it gives daily service. So as one moves closer in to the plinth, so that lower edge of the temple that we see, we come closer towards some of these practitioners that we see, and Daniela has spoken of, these ascetics performing complex asanas. And as we look at an individual example of this, we might say, look, here he is practicing Kukutasana, a practice which we know has made it through to contemporary practice. So if you go down to Soho in London today, or in New York, you may find you attend a vinyasa class or a Ashtanga yoga class, you may be asked to perform this particular practice. So here we have it carved in stone on a wall and on the lower plinth of a temple. But what's missing is we don't really know who this person was. What was he doing? How long was he holding the posture for? What did he think he was doing? So although the sculptural record provides some details, what's missing is we have to be careful that we don't read too much into the sculptural record. So in this case, for example, photo by Daniela herself from a temple in Hampi, we see a Nat Yogi, so we know he's identified, we can identify him through his insignia, so we can say he's a yogi, but he's performed in the 18th century. So what do we know? What do we find? It definitely isn't part of early Hatha yoga. It's not defined as part of a corpus of techniques. But so perhaps this particular yogi was performing a karana, a dance routine for the king at a festival. So these are sorts of things that aren't clearly understood without an accompanying textual record. So that's where we'll move along a little quickly, if we can, to the manuscripts themselves. And the manuscripts are our most complete and revealing evidence of the history of Hatha Yoga, and this literature itself is recorded on palm leaf and paper manuscripts from about the 11th century onwards. And this literature provides details such as the aims of the practice, who was practicing it, for what purpose. So the philological research of the Hatha Yoga project had identified 10 key texts that are essential for defining or at least understanding this evolution of the practice of Hatha Yoga over time. And as Daniela mentioned, and we saw in the broader South Asia, to identify collections which included manuscripts that were significant. So texts were in museums, they were in libraries, they were also in private collections. And then there's the process of also transcribing these texts, because they not only are they necessarily sometimes in poor condition, in the condition of decay if they're not well preserved, but they also may be in a number of numerous scripts, so not just Devanagari, they may be in a number of Indic scripts recording the textual records. So in order to give people a sense of what happens in the background when you try to bring a text to light, and before you receive it as a text in English, like you might be able to go to your local bookshop and pick up a text on the Hatha Pradipika or the Patanjali's Yoga Shastra. But before that happens, there's a lot of, in fact, decades of work that goes into collecting, transcribing, collating, and editing and edition. So if you'd like to learn more about that, we put together a documentary called Manuscripts on Leaves. I believe Bhavi is going to drop in the comments the link where you can go. It's only a 10-minute film, but it was really designed to give people a sense of what it's like to viscerally work with these old palm leaf manuscripts in India. This is one example. This is just one library that we visited. In fact, it was particularly challenging in many ways because the librarian didn't have a hand list of what was in her collection. So she asked us to look at it and help her with that. So one of the manuscripts we had on display was that of the Yoga Bija. We were able to borrow a couple of manuscripts for the exhibition from the Bodleian collection in Oxford University Library. And both of these manuscripts that we had on display are about 18th or 19th century manuscripts. And in the volume, you find a collection of yoga texts. And in this case, where we had on display the Yoga Bija, the manuscript itself and the text itself was probably written, in fact, its date is 1884, and the folio we had on display was a very important definition of Hatha Yoga. So in this case, we have this definition of yoga, not just meaning that definition of yoga as samadhi or absorption in seated meditation, but rather the union of the lower and upper vitalities, the generative fluids, the moon with the sun, the individual self with the supreme self, the union of a multitude of opposites, in this way is said to be yoga. So again, the Hatha Yoga project, in this case, Jason Birch was able to identify a very early recension. So we found a 13th century recension of this particular text with a definition, and he's working to produce a critical edition along with James Mallinson on this particular text. And we accompanied some of the manuscripts themselves with images. So the images that we find, not only paintings, but also in this case, a lithograph of techniques. And in this image, it depicts one of the earliest physical techniques of Hatha Yoga called Mahamudra, or the Great Seal. So this has been identified by Dr. Mallinson in his edition of the Amrita Siddhi, an 11th century Buddhist Vajrayana text that he's editing for the project. And here we find that rather than a simple meditative posture, we find a complex shape in which the yogin himself is performing a series of breath retentions and internal locks, so the lock at the throat and the lock at the mula, the root. Another example is, in this case, we have an illustration of Viparita Karani, in this case in an 18th or 19th century illustrated manuscript of the Yoga Pradipika. It's called in this particular manuscript, it's called Viparita Karani Asana. But if we look at the early textual record, we'd find that going upside down was a really key part of Hatha Yoga, and it often falls under the category of being a mudra, and a mudra being a seal in which one, in this case, would seal the vitality or draw the vitality down to replenish the moon in the head and then rejuvenate the body. So a lot of these techniques were about rejuvenation, healing diseases, and overcoming old age, which is a very, still symbolic of what some people pursue yoga for today. 1 second. I've just added very quickly 2 manuscript images. We won't talk too much about them, but just to say that by the 17th century, we start to find evidence that the practice of Hatha Yoga, all these techniques of yoga, were transferable amongst many religious traditions. So we have visual evidence from a Sufi manuscript, the Bar al-Hayat, of practitioners. In this case, they're likely not. The way it's described is within the language of Sufism. We also find Jain yoga practitioners. So here we are with YOGÄSANA, again, an early 19th century with a Jain practitioner. We know he's Jain because he has his accoutrements, his brush and his mask placed to the side while he practices, in this case, YOGÄSANA. The manuscript section also included an elaborate invitation to look at the inside of one of these temples, the Mahamudra, which is a temple in Jodhpur, Rajasthan in India. Let me just turn my notes. And in this case, it's we were really lucky enough to work with Neil Greentree, who's a wonderful photographer who has a real strong connection with the royal family in Jodhpur, and he was able to get us access and take these photographs on our behalf, not only of the Mahamudra, but also the Udayamandira, which has never been revealed to the public before in terms of published photographs. And so these splendid images are from the early 19th century. They're wall paintings of Nat yogis in Jodhpur, Rajasthan, and they were commissioned by Man Singh, the Maharaj of Marwar. And these spectacularly detailed, if we look closely at the yogi here, we can almost see his eyelashes, his beard, every hair is done with probably just one thread of hair on a brush. And he's in a tranquil but non-seated sort of asana. And so what we start to find is through the study of these particular images, alongside the textual record, we find that these were documenting a very complex system of probably 84 asanas. And this asana practice included, details such as breath retentions, gazing points, drishtis, as well as what diet the yogi must undertake. He's going to practice these particular sequence over a period of time, and in some cases to the detailed and beautiful images within the Mahamudra. The Udayamandira seems the images are much more vibrant, but probably less skillfully painted on the walls. However, it's likely, like having done some study of these quite seriously, it's likely that these have been repainted over at some point in time. But the value of the images within the Udayamandira is that they sometimes are accompanied by a label, so giving us a description of the technique that the yogi is performing. And in this way, we're able to trace and map it against a historical textual record in order to rebuild or understand what he was actually doing in these particular postures. So we'll move to the ethnographic section with Daniela.
Thank you, Jackie. So in this section, I introduced the four main religious orders I was working with during my fieldworks, and these are, you can say from left to right, the Nat Sampradaya, the Dashnami Sampradaya, the Ramanandi Sampradaya, and the Udasin Akara. And these are the four orders traditionally connected with the physical practices of yoga as well as austerities. And we decided to work with ascetics because yoga and Hatha yoga originated in and developed in an ascetic context. Until now, not much scholarship was done about it. That is quite surprising, I have to say. And instead, if one looks at ascetic practitioners, it really helps in reconstructing the history of Hatha yoga. And I could verify this during my fieldworks, especially simply asking to sadhus what was Hatha yoga according to them. And their answers really created a new understanding, a new perspective for us, and therefore made us realizing that the meaning of Hatha yoga has to be considered with a wider approach, not only that of textual sources from the 15th century on. And after this, in the main cabinet of this section, I tried to put all the main focus, all the main topics I was working with over these years. And you can see I tried to explain everything. So there is a lot of writing in there. Actually, this exhibition is quite heavy about the boards, because as I said, we did a lot and we wanted to share, but of course, then the public can get even a bit bored about it. Anyway, so in this cabinet, not only I put explanations, but I tried to visually attract the public with photographs, with objects. You can see on the right a small bag that is the joli that sadhus use to put their staff, a yoga danda that they use for support themselves while meditating. But especially there was this manuscript from the 18th century that is collected in the Bodleian Library. And we were lucky to have it because it contains an amazing painting and amazing miniatures of representing a sadhu, an Urdu Bahu, that is a sadhu doing tapasya, austerity, that is done keeping the arms up. And we put this manuscript very close to a contemporary Urdu Bahu. You can see here Amar Bharti. Unfortunately, he passed last year. And in this way, we wanted to show the continuity of these practices from past to present. And I gave a particular importance to tapasyas because, as Jackie also was suggesting, tapasyas and physical practices like asanas were very much connected. And in fact, I think that asanas are and can be understood as a form of austerities for sadhus. In fact, in the next slide, we can see, it's coming, a sadhu performing asanas after tapasya, the dhuni tapa with the fire. But we know from a record from the end of the 18th century that sadhus could also decide to perform asanas, the Churasi asana, the 84 asanas, as a form of austerity. And this comes from a record written by Jonathan Duncan, an employee of the English of the company, and he met by chance this Urdu Bahu, a sadhu keeping his arm up, Purnapuri, and looking and listening at his story, life story, he wrote down that Purnapuri told him he could choose among several forms of austerities, but of course, he decided to become an Urdu Bahu. But among these forms of austerities, there was also the Churasi asanas. That means he could have chosen to sit in different postures and keeping this posture for several hours. Like here it's written like with the feet and the neck or under the arms and so on. And I could verify during my fieldworks that even today, there are some sadhus that do the 84 asanas as a form of austerity. And so the purpose is to accomplish this circle of 84. But anyway, the sadhus really learn asanas with this kind of attitude, just one asana at a time and with all their full intention. However, since asana is a big topic in the modern yoga world, let's say, in the exhibition, you could also find a small documentary, 20 minutes, that I prepared with Simone Ludovici, that is actually a collection of different videos from my fieldworks in which I try to explain the understanding of sadhus, of asanas, how they learn asanas, what kind of asanas they practice, and in which context they do that. And probably you will find the link to watch this documentary in the chat. Yes, it's there. Perfect. So I will move towards the last section of this ethnographic part that is based on representation. It's actually dedicated to this fantastic female ascetic, Rampriya Das. And she is the only female ascetic I met that was trained in physical practices during her childhood. And I was also lucky that her Guruji took pictures of her when she was 12 years old, and I was allowed to take pictures of these pictures. So we filled a wall with all her images, and you can see in this close-up that is coming. Yeah, you can see that she could do asanas, she was doing the shatkarmas that sadhus call simply kriyas, and also form of austerities. And as I said, this is quite rare to find, because usually young women are hampered from entering these traditional groups, and especially they are not so easily allowed to perform these practices, not only by male sadhus, but also by society. And so for this reason, I thought it was quite nice to dedicate an entire wall to her. And also this was a way to explain and to show a big difference, because as I said, it's quite rare to find female practitioners among these groups, which makes quite a big difference if we instead consider the majority of the practitioners of modern yoga, which are instead women. And like moving towards modern yoga, I would like to give the words back to Jackie, and to explain us. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, so the exhibition concluded with returning back to a manuscript, in this case, the Hatha Abhyasa Padati. So Hatha, the type of yoga, Abhyasa, the practice, and this is a Padati, a guidebook on the practice of yoga. And we really consider this particular text to be of extreme significance, because it really documents what is a precursor to modern yoga, and that yoga which was committed to the West by certain gurus. So before the Hatha Yoga project, in fact, Jason Birch had uncovered a manuscript of this Hatha Abhyasa Padati, and it's an unillustrated manuscript of the Hatha Asanas in 6 sequences. And so it provides us with a window into a form of practice which was quite dynamic, and the purpose of these asanas was to bring about bodily strength. So previously, it was thought amongst scholarship that perhaps these dynamic moving practices, those that mimicked animal movements, those that were done in sequence, were influenced by Western thought. However, by finding this particular manuscript, we're locating this type of practice well before colonialism, in pre-colonial India. And in this case, it was prolific enough within India to come to the attention of the Mysore Palace. And so what we published before, in this case, a second manuscript of the Hatha Abhyasa Padati, this manual on the guidebook. And it was quite a funny story, because Jason and I had been since 2012 looking all over India for this manuscript. And in fact, we sort of knew where it was, but bureaucratically we weren't allowed to see it. However, after a field trip to Canada, of all places, and one night sitting with a fellow scholar in his attic and going through slides that he took during a visit in 1985, we found the missing manuscript that we've been looking for many, many years. So it was a really, remarkable moment, and it still gives me goosebumps on my skin. And we spent that night photographing this particular manuscript so that we could really reveal this unusual text. And you can read more about this now. Recently, Jason Birch and Mark Singleton have written a really important fundamental article about this particular text in the Journal of Yoga Studies. So part of our exhibition included the reconstruction of this practice because it's quite close to what we find in lineages of yoga that have come to us through the Mysore Palace. So those traditions such as Ashtanga Vinyasa of Pattabhi Jois or Iyengar Yoga, anything that's sort of stemming from Krishnamacharya, we see sort of threads of similarity coming through the practice. So here we worked with skillful practitioners, both in London, in this case you're seeing Philippa Asher. We worked with three practitioners in London. We also worked with a group of practitioners in India because a lot of the techniques were quite dynamic and required a dexterity. So if we look at a particular posture, in this case, you might go to, again, another class down the road in your local scout hall and be asked to stand on one foot and lift up one toe. And this posture itself has made it into contemporary practice. But if we look at the description in the textual record, we find that rather than standing still, the practitioner is asked to hop around on one foot. So she's actually spinning, hence the name, the pole star pose. But some of the postures, the 112 asanas, were well beyond the practitioners we were working with in London. So we had to find practitioners in India, and in this case it was a school in Maharashtra, Khed, the town of Khed, where they work with strong physical dynamic asanas that are part of the national curriculum of studying physical postures as part of the school curriculum. And then we needed practitioners that not only had the strength and dexterity to hold themselves very steadily and push up into a handstand, but then also then place their pelvis on their head and put their heels underneath their throat. So in this case, Pavan is very dexterously showing us the practice of Malasana, the garland pose. And this particular text also includes rope postures, again, which is not the exact type of postures that have made it through to contemporary practice through Iyengar, but postures on ropes nonetheless, which have a living tradition in India, and they're often usually performed by women. Actually, young girls get taught these rope postures as part of their school curriculum. And so here we have Dandasana, a stick pose, but rather than seated on the ground as a danda or a stick, you're required to hold yourself steady on a rope. So that was, what we attempted to do with the reconstruction was give people a film of two of the sequences, and we hope to have that film released later in the year.
Okay, we've got about sort of a few minutes to just do some questions. I wanted to say thank you so much for sharing that wealth of knowledge with us. It's just absolutely brilliant. As someone I've been to the Kumbh Mela in India, I've seen some of these ascetics, and I've seen what they can do in all of their asanas or their positions. And I went about 14, 15 years ago, and I couldn't help but think, why are they doing this? Yoga in our current situation is something that people enjoy to keep fit, to keep healthy, to, it brings about mental well-being and all that kind of stuff. But if you can just tell me sort of very, very quickly, what do you think is the main motivation for these ascetics to do these very, very complicated asanas and the positions? I know you mentioned that it's sort of they do it to sort of it's part of the austerity, not austerity, sort of, yeah. But why would they want to do that? Why would they want to stand on one foot for 3 hours? What's the ultimate aim of that?
Okay.
Complete, like if a teenager from
Okay.
London
Okay. So first of all, I have to make a distinction between sadhus doing tapasyas, austerities, like standing up on a leg or keeping the arms up. So the reason why they do this form of austerities can be different. Can be because it's a kind of vow, so they aim to accomplish something, because in this way they are more in touch with the subtle body. In this way they also get detached by the body, because this is just, they have to be detached to reach a different kind of aims. And also in this way they work on the intention. Because, if you keep doing this kind of practices, then your religious practice will improve as well. So, I mean, the austerities is quite a topic. But if we look at asanas instead, that is, according to sadhus, there are two typologies of asanas. There are the asanas that are useful for doing the job. That is like the job, the yoga sadhana for sadhus is dhyan, meditation. So the most important asanas are the seated postures. So Padmasana, Siddhasana, and so on. And the other asanas are necessary to keep the body fit. So they can use it because after doing meditation for many hours, they need to do a bit of stretching, or they can do it like 10 minutes a day to maintain the body healthy. But of course, if you go in the Kumbh Mela, showing asanas can be a show. So it's like, it becomes a kind of nayak, they say. It's a kind of performance to give anand, to give joy and blessing to the people. So it's really about the context in where they do that. So if you watch, for example, the documentary, you will see these different aspects. And maybe everything will be a bit clear.
Yeah. Okay, I've got a couple of questions that have come through our Q&A part. So there was an early image in the exhibition where there was a painting of the yogi, which had lots of symbols. I think you talked about one of the symbols, perhaps a snake symbol, but the question is, what do the other symbols on the yogi's body signify? Was that, I think, Jacqueline, you were talking about that.
Sure. Generally speaking, they're symbolic of a visualized lotus or a visualized deity within a particular chakra in the body. So in some cases, or in most cases, they align along the length of the spine. And in this case, we saw that line running up the spine. And the complexity of that inner world depends on the tradition you're sitting within. So if you're looking at early tantric yoga, they really had a very chakras and deities seated at different places along the length of the spine. But as we moved into Hatha yoga, that which is sort of more focused on physical practices, these visualizations or putting deities at certain places in the body wasn't so important. What was important was the technique of moving in the vitality upwards, and it's described as one that these places sit like you might find a particular deity seated at the heart, which has 1,000 lotus petals. It might be upside down or covered in milk or some quite complex visualization. But none of this is important if you understand the techniques of Hatha yoga, because you can pierce through these chakras and enable your primordial energy to travel up to the top chakra, in which your predominant deity may sit. So it may be Shiva at the top, and so your Shakti, your feminine energy, or your snake, which was represented by Kundalini, travels up, and she meets and joins in this union at the top of the head, resulting in your liberated state. So it's a very wonderful and beautiful inner world that the yogi experiences.
Fantastic. Another question that's come through is, what was the attitude of the Islamic authorities towards yoga once Mughal rule was established over most of India? If I may add to that, what were the attitudes when the British were ruling over India and when they saw some of these practices? Is there any evidence in your research about these things?
I mean, about this last part, you can read The Yoga Bodies by Mark Singleton, where he really summarized the attitude of the employees of the companies towards the so-called Hatha yogi. Of course, they were looked like, I would say, about a bit like the freaks, because they were doing something that was strange. And of course, they did not match with the idea of monks or holy person according to a Christian background. So of course their attitude was very much biased towards these sadhus, and I think they were often trying to see if they were more like liars, and they were trying to taste if they were actually doing this kind of practices or not. For the Mughal time, instead, it's very much complicated, because it depends on the emperor. we know that Akbar was very much interested, even Babu, they were very much interested in yogis, and they used to meet yogis because they wanted to learn some practices, especially those connected with the immortality. And that is what, and even Dara Shikoh was very much in touch with the yogis. And we have a lot of efforts in translating this manuscript from Sanskrit to Urdu, so that they could circulate in this kind of more, let's say, in the court of these emperors. But even the Sufis themselves, they were very much in touch, because we have to understand that the religious background was very fluid. And so Sufis and sadhus from different groups, they were very much interacting and sharing practices, because what was important was the aim. And so it's like, if you know a technique that can be useful, maybe I will use it and I will reinterpret it according to my own perspective of religion and my personal religious aim. But so you see this kind of movement of practices among these different ascetic orders, and it's super interesting. So the amount of material is like enormous, and especially this Urdu text, they are like a treasure still to dig into. So if anyone wants to start the work, please do it.
It's amazing. I mean, just a very quick, just a final question actually to both of you is, what was your motivation to do this wonderful work and to create this exhibition? I mean, are you yoga practitioners yourselves, or have you trained in Hatha yoga or anything like that? Or is it just something that you found very interesting?
I can be very fast in answering this. I was working with sadhus, ascetics before, and James Melanson asked me to join the team. I mean, I was doing a bit of yoga, but just stretching, not very much interested. So I had to study a lot while starting this research. But for me, it was a way to, to dig into something quite new and to remain in the ascetic world. That for me is the most interesting part of Indian culture. So that's it. Jackie.
For me, I basically devoted my life to the study of yoga more than 25 years now. I came to the practice, and I consider myself more a practitioner than a scholar. I don't have, the team themselves, like Daniela, Jason, Mark, and Jim, other scholars, and this is their research. For me, it's more about how does one relate to the history of yoga, and what does it mean to take something out of a cultural context, such as India, and now it's in the West, and we see these challenges, because like Daniela hinted at before, we're going from a practice which may sit within a religious milieu practiced mainly by men in a commercial secular environment practiced by women. And so for me this brings up a lot of questions, and I came to the practice mainly because I was really interested in meditation, and I started to read really widely, including Buddhist material, but I also realized that the health of a practitioner, so that is important to achieving these sort of deep states of meditation. And so the mechanisms that evolved in Hatha yoga are really quite extraordinary, and they really understood what was happening, not only with the breath, but its connection with the mind, and then how to bring about a very deep, quiet, meditative state. So yeah, that's my little bit of my story.
That was absolutely fantastic and really, really, really interesting. I think for quite a lot of people who are watching this, probably some of that would have been overwhelming, and so much information and all those wonderful Sanskrit names of various asanas and various different groups of practitioners and all of that, but it just whets the appetite for us to want to find out more. So I do urge people to look at those links. There's a question that did come through that said, how would you distinguish terms such as tapasya, yoga, asana, and also yogi, tyagi, sadhu? But I think that would have taken such a long time to answer.
Yeah.
And perhaps by watching some of those links that are in the chat, maybe those questions can be answered.
Yeah. And I'm writing a book about it, so just wait 1 year and everything will be clear.
Look out for your book. So no, thank you so much. I want to just say thank you to both of you. Thank you to SOAS and the Brunei Gallery people for making this happen, and for, I've been at the Knowledge Quarter for a year and a half, and this is our first event with SOAS. I'm really thrilled that we could make this happen. Thank you, Daniela. Thank you, Jacqueline.
Thanks
See you
to
soon.
you, Bhav.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.